hold on. I won't. No, we won't. Okay. Dear Heavenly God, thank you so much for bringing us all here together. We expectantly look forward to that rest from the week and focus on your truth, on the lessons that you're teaching us. And we are so grateful that you brought us all here together to review this presentation on communication technology and the gospel, and help us to understand more and more of the message you've been open our hearts and our minds and grasp onto all of these truths, and help us to put all of these ideas in place and into remembrance. Thank you, Lord, for your love and mercy and your watch care. And we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen. Okay. Sorry. I'm a little discombobulated. I don't know why. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video so I don't lose my internet. Okay. And now I'm going to share screen. I want to share, I think, this one. So hopefully you're looking at just the Midnight Watch, communication technology, and the gospel. You're not seeing anything on the side.
Yes, got it. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it? Yeah. Okay, so this continuing our review of tracing the journey, we're going over tonight the communication technology and the gospel that Elder Tess presented on August 29, 2020. And okay, so hopefully I got this right. Yeah, okay. And then this is just a page that shows all the references and the link to the. We're going to start off with it. I love reading her prayers just because she has an idea of her direction, right? And she always is very intuitive. So if you don't mind, so dear God in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you for your Sabbath day. Thank you for how you have cared for us and all that you have done for us. Thank you for your guiding in our past history. We know that you have been faithful to us. I pray, Lord, that we'll be faithful to you. May we see your past guiding and trust you now. Trust you with our futures. I pray as we study these things, we're studying that past guiding, and it is designed line upon line to explain and aid us as we live in this challenging time. I pray, Lord, that we will take hold of these lines, that we'll understand them as you intend us to, and that they will anchor us in this movement in your truth. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I hope you guys are ready to participate tonight, because I created this. Okay, don't get scared, but it's 100 slides. And but I'm doing that because like some slides only have like one sentence on it, like a question. So I want you guys to participate because this is all about review, right? And so I want you to think about, a lot of the slides will have questions on them, and I want you guys to answer them before she answers them, okay? Because this is all about review, and the way we are learning is by reviewing, and you guys try to answer the questions too, okay? So, okay, so we have been going on quite some tangents over the last weeks. We've been intending to come around to a study of Millerite history, about Alpha history, but we've been on a number of tangents. So I really want to get back on track, but we're going to begin with just looking at something that looks disconnected, but it will be connected. I want to come back to the end of ancient Israel. Okay, and so she starts off right here, and this is the board work, and she writes end of ancient Israel on the board. And her question is, and my question is to you, so you guys open your mics. So the end of ancient Israel, when does that reform line begin?
4 BC.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So Brendan, he said 4 BC also. Thank you, Regina. And Elder Tess says yes. Okay, now the next question. What happened in 4 BC? And I want to, before you answer that question, let's go back and remind ourselves what the topic is, what the title of this presentation is. It's called Communication Technology and the Gospel. And the gospel is the message, right? And over the different times, you know, the movements, we've had different messages, right? So remembering that communication technology. So what happened in 4 BC? What was happening? Anybody?
In line of the communication, right?
Yes.
The Pax Romano, the building of the roads,
Yes.
time of peace and the building of the roads.
Exactly. So this is so I put this at the top. Pax Romana, or why Jesus came in 4 BC. So exactly. So thank you. So answers in chat were end of ancient Israel, birth of Christ, and Elder Tess said, so this is 4 BC. This is the first Advent. So why 4 BC? And then other people are answering birth of John the Baptist, and Elder Tess says, yes, why 4 BC? Now there's a number of reasons that but there's one that I'm looking for, and it was the one that Elaine gave us. And I'm not going to give you any other hints. Why 4 BC? Why does God choose that point in your history for his first advent? Someone says 4th generation, someone says because of Rome. So why because of Rome? What was it about Rome? Rome united the known world. So this is the answers. Rome united the known world, political context, because the Romans had control of the world, because the Roman Empire is all connected. And all of those questions were correct. So yes, so the Roman Empire is all connected. And she says, so how long does the Roman Empire extend for? How many years? Anyone?
200?
Yes, close to,
330 AD?
it was close to 200 years. So let's see. So somebody else answers 330 AD, right? And is that what you answered, Jackie? 330 AD? So
Yeah.
Elder Tess says 330 AD, and that's when it started, and it also begins well before then. So I'm looking for how long a time span, and that's what Legina gave us. And the answer, somebody answered 360 years. So some people say 360 years, yes, and they're marking that particularly from quite a constricted period of time when it's ruling with that degree of dominion. You could extend it and see the Roman Empire as being much larger than that, but I understand why you said 360, a time, which like, so in quotes, you know, air quotes, a time, as we're told in prophecy. So you could make that broader. You're extending it to that 360-year time period, but even then, 4 BC is quite specific. So I want to talk just briefly about the Pax Romana. Okay, so and this is where you can see she's putting in here 200 years. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, extended from 27 BC to 180 AD. And within this 200, it was a little over 200, so approximate 200-year time span, you have, so inside of this, there's 4 BC to 180. And remember that, you know, Jesus and John the Baptist were born in 4 BC. And so what happened in 100 AD? Anybody?
John the Revelator at Patmos and return of Jesus.
Exactly. So this whole time period falls inside of this 200-year Roman peace time. So within this about 200-year time period, you have 4 BC to 100 AD, and that is the reform line of the end of ancient Israel. So this being the reform line of ancient Israel. So of those thousands of years that you have, Christ uses that time period for his first advent. So from, from Adam and Eve up until, here, Christ uses that time to come back to his first, or to come for his first advent. And that 104-year time period is neatly condensed within this 200-year Pax Romana. So I'm just gonna, so she's saying, I'm just going to read a couple quotes about it. And so this is from Ellen White, EGW writings, and this is from the Source Book for Bible Students. And the quote is, "That state of general peace, which extended throughout the Roman Empire under the prosperous reign of Augustus Caesar, was peculiarly fitted for the advent of the Prince of Peace."
That time.
Continuing the, oh no, this isn't, so she's, right now she's quoting from Wikipedia on the top, it's called Pax Romana in Wikipedia. So the Pax Romana, which is Latin for Roman peace, is a roughly 200-year long period in Roman history, which is identified with increased and sustained inner hegemonial peace and stability, though not without wars, expansion, and revolts. It is traditionally dated as commencing from the ascension of Caesar Augustus, founder of the Roman Principate, in 27 BC, and concluding in 100 AD with the death of Marcus Aurelius, the last of the good emperors. Since it was inaugurated by Augustus with the end of the final war of the Roman Republic, it is sometimes called the Pax Augustus or Augustus Peace. During this period of approximately 2 centuries, the Roman Empire achieved its greatest territorial extent, and its population reached a maximum of up to 70 million people. Wow. Continuing from Wikipedia, the Pax Romana is said to have been a miracle because prior to it, there had never been peace for so many centuries in a given period of history. Okay, so back on the board, she's putting Pax Romana here for the end of ancient Israel for BC, and Pax Romana is what she's saying is the reason why Christ was able to come back at this time because of that Roman peace, right? And so back to Elder Tessa's, so you might have some peace, before this, you might have a small period here, a small period there of peace, but you're not going to have just about 2 centuries of peace. When you're going to have a 104-year reform line, when you're going to have that extent of time that's needed for the gospel to come, for Christ to have his first advent, to spread throughout the known world, you need that type of time period of peace. Okay, so before I go on, does anybody have any questions, comments? Am I talking too fast? Very good. Okay, if you do, okay, you're always welcome to interrupt me. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Good to hear your voice. Okay, so now she's quoting from a World History Encyclopedia called Pax Romana. Quote, "Through the triumphs of Caesar, Augustus, Claudius, and Marcus Aurelius, Rome became one of the largest empires that had ever existed, greater than that of Persia, Assyria, and even challenging that of Alexander the Great. However, a territory that large caused many difficulties, many of them costly. riots, rebellions, and insurrections. The solution to many of these problems came under the astute leadership of Emperor Augustus. It was called the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. He had gained political and military control and built an empire. Augustus secured the borders, stabilized their economy, and brought a sense of peace. Let's see. I'm sorry, I didn't have the Concord. I'm sorry, Troy, I didn't have the chat open, and I did, so I don't know when you put that in there. I apologize. I have the chat open now, so if you guys, if you're using chat to answer my questions, okay, great, right. So Concord, everybody in unity and peace, yeah. Cool. So you can see that what God is waiting for that first advent is not only was there to be peace, but it was also to be a peace that spread throughout a territory as was then possible. Under Augustus, it reaches this large extent, a maximum of about 70 million people, and Augustus is able to bring peace to that large territory. It's almost as great as the empire of Alexander. So question, why couldn't Christ come back in the time period of Alexander the Great? Anybody?
So that would have to do with the ability to travel? Is that right?
I think it's the peace, because during the time of
Okay.
during the time of Alexander the Great, there was a lot of turbulence stuff, war and such.
Okay. I was thinking you'd already discussed that, and so we're moving to the next topic. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Was Alexander the Great? Okay, so help me with my timelines. The Alexander the Great came after Rome, right?
Go first.
First.
Well,
Okay,
they came
so
before.
yeah, right. Okay, so we wouldn't have had the roads either. So both.
Yeah, a lot of turmoil, a lot of war, and so the
Right.
gospel could not go out.
Right, exactly. Even on the sea, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's when, so Pax Romano on land and on sea, they controlled all the pirates of the seas, and so there was peace, land and sea.
Right. And Paul would not have been able to spread his message if there was not peace on the sea also.
Right.
Cool, thank you. Both of you. Thanks for, I appreciate you guys participating. So because they're all fighting, so that fighting never stopped. There wasn't peace. There needed to be this ceasing of war and rebellion, riots and insurrections. And I would imagine you would have to have peace to be able to build the roads also.
Right.
Right, yeah. Okay, so another quote from World History Encyclopedia. Under Augustus, they say, even the seas were cleared of pirates, enabling the expansion of trade. New roads, over 50,000 miles of them, made communication easier. Rome was made great again.
You have to have peace to build an empire
Right.
as big as Rome was.
Yeah, and to be able to keep it together for so long.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know why they put that in there. What she says, I think, oh, I didn't notice that till just now. Rome was made great again. Okay, that's funny. She says, I don't know why they put that in there. You have peace, but not just peace on land. He's brought peace to the seas, and he cleared the seas of pirates. So there's peace on land, there's peace on sea. This empire extends to as large a territory as was then possible. And he's also known for the building, for the building that he did. I'm sorry, he's also known for the building that he did. So another question, what's the one of these things being built? What's one of these things being built?
Aqueducts.
True, I think that's true. But I think because we've already been talking about roads, I think that was the answer. Because she doesn't have it written on here yet. So, but you're right, they did build a lot of aqueducts. So she says the roads. So we're I don't think so everybody, I'm gonna remind everyone, not everybody who is here right now was here when I said the title of this presentation is called Communication Technology and the Gospel. So a lot of so most all of the answers are going to revolve around communication and how that communication was achieved. So all of the different movements. So you've got the beginning of ancient Israel, end of ancient Israel, the beginning of modern Israel, end of modern Israel, you know, our time. This all has to do with communication and getting the message across, right? Spreading, God being able to spread the message through his people. And how was he able to successfully do that through his people? So hopefully that helps. So the roads. So we are going to go onto the roads as well, because what were the roads all about? What did the roads make easier? And this is all about communication.
Reaching people.
Reaching people, that's right. Okay, hit another quote. New roads, over 50,000 miles of them, made communication easier. The Roman people understood and valued the peace and security that Augustus's new order brought to the empire. To them, he became a god, and from this worship emerged the imperial cult. Henceforth, an emperor, oh shoot, my tongues are getting tight. An emperor would, with only a few exceptions, be deified after his death. All right, sorry. So, okay, back to Elder Tess. So I wanted us to just have a very brief look at the Roman roads. And she continues to quote, in the itinerary of, I know how to pronounce it, Antoninus, the description of the road system after the death of Julius Caesar and during the tenure of Augustus is as follows. With the exception of some outlying portions, such as Britain north of the wall, Dacia, and certain provinces was penetrated by the itinera, plural for iter. There is hardly a district to which we might expect a Roman official to be sent on service, either civil or military, where we do not find roads. They reach the wall in Britain, run along the Rhine, the Danube, and the Euphrates, and cover, as with a network, the interior provinces of the empire. I just want to share I just want to share screen for a moment. So this is Elder Tess, right? This is the extent of Roman roads. So I couldn't find this picture. I'm going to read this paragraph, but then I'm going to show you a different picture I found for a different time, but it has to do with the same topic, but it's just not, I know it's not the same picture that she showed. So she's saying this is 170 AD, but much of this happened earlier. This is particularly as we heard described under Augustus. So she's showing a picture of the Roman roads system. So I couldn't find one that was going to give us that time period. This is 170 AD, nearly to the end of Pax Romana. This is what they already had put in place, and this is the network of Roman roads that extended through the Roman Empire. this was something that was quite new, especially to be done in this way to this extent. Okay, so what I'm showing you is this map from Wikipedia called Roman roads. It is the Roman Empire in 125 AD. So this is before, so hers was in 170. And this is, I can't subtract really quick, 125 from 170. But highlighting the road system, it is labeled the Roman Empire in the time of Hadrian, who ruled from 117 to 138 AD, showing the network of main Roman roads. So this would be after Paul, right? But because that's 125. So it shows the roads slightly after Paul. So there'd be like a little bit less, but still you can get an idea of how expansive it was, okay? And the map is labeled Roman Empire 125 AD. And so that all these in the red, these are all the road system. And you can see they were all the way over into Africa, along the coast, all the way up. And let's see, this is in the Jerusalem area, right? Judah, right in here. And then Paul sailed all through in here. So they even had some in Sicily and all through Rome, of course, and Spain, Portugal, all the way up into Britain, all through in here. What I forget what all this would be. Is this it's like, okay, now I'm lost in my maps, but is this like, would be Ukraine and stuff? This is all Europe. So is this like Russia up in here? I think. And then
Yes, up in there, Russia, yeah.
okay. So you can see how extensive those roads were, how extensive that Roman Empire was, right? So I think this pink line is the extent of the empire. Here it goes in here. Okay. So, all right. So and you can all of the pictures, all of the images I'm showing you are probably not the ones that she showed when this presentation was presented on, you know, when the presentation shows her and not what she was showing on screen. And so I'm guessing at what she was showing, but I tried to get close to what she was talking about. Okay. So I want us to see how they built these roads. I don't intend to spend long on this, just to see how technical this was. This wasn't just laying stones. They actually had built up these extensive layers, sometimes quite a few feet of these layers. This one shows a 4-layer system, but these roads could extend 3 feet, 4 feet into the ground, depending upon whether or not they were built on solid land or more damp swamp-like land. So I got these pictures that I'm going to show you all came from this video called Were Roman Roads More Durable Than Modern Highways? It's a really good illustration of how they did it. They show the different roads, and they talked about it and stuff like that. And they talked that, you know, all this was dug out. You know, they just took all of this dirt out and then built it on the side, and they filled it in with rock and sand, and then the paving stones, and it was really technical and solid. You know, it's no wonder that a lot of these roads are still in existence to today. And I read somewhere else that they just learned not that long ago that they dug trenches off to like 100 feet off to the side on both sides of the road. I don't know how big the trenches were, but it was to prevent people from, you know, like robbers and stuff, to slow people down from trying to rob people on, you know, prevent theft and, you know, bad things. Okay, so you can see how these roads still stand today. See how polished those stones are by the foot traffic. these roads are so polished, and you can see how years and years and years of those wagon tires have actually created these crevices in the roads. Okay, so I didn't find one with crevices, but you can see how polished these rocks are, and that was quite normal. So when you think of how our roads break down today, they didn't just lay stone slabs. This was an extensive work that they did. And honestly, compared to how our roads stand up today, this was quite an incredible feat. Some of them lasting thousands of years, 2,000 years by now. And you can see the amount of traffic that these roads carried. Okay. And then this one. So someone says they probably did not take as much weight as nowadays roads do. Another test says, well, I think they took a lot of weight. When you have horses and carts and loaded carts, when you have the march of infantry, I think they would have had quite a lot of wearing down, and probably a wearing down that was not as evenly placed. Those thin wagon wheels, how they would drive into those cracks in the stones and dislodge them. I think it's quite incredible. Okay, so I just wanted us to see the two things that made this the right time for Christ to come. He had to wait for that time period. He couldn't come in the time of Assyria when they didn't have peace on land or sea, when they didn't have the roads to enable communication to travel. He has to wait until the reign of Augustus that begins in 27 BC. In 4 BC, Jesus comes, and you have from 27 to 180 AD, this time period that allowed for the growth and the spread of the gospel. Okay, so now I want to skip down. We'll move past that to the Protestant Reformation. So now we're moving on. So we did in ancient Israel. Now we're moving on to the Protestant Reformation. Now what happened? Okay, so when does the Protestant Reformation take off? Someone give me a date, just a rough date. Does anyone know what year the Protestant Reformation is taking off?
1500s?
Yeah. Pretty,
Yeah, 1520.
Yeah, so it's definitely the 1500s, and she's marking it as 1518. So really close, right in there. Yeah. So someone says 1517, and she says, why 1517? And someone says 1529. She says, I'm not saying there's just one right answer, but if you can explain in a few words as you're able, why? So someone says 1518, and this is when Martin Luther nails his 95 Thesis onto the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral. So 1518, why 1518? So think about that, why? Why can it happen now? So Bob and Penny are going with the Diet of Spires. That's a clever answer because that's when it's called Protestant. 1850, I'm sorry, 1850, 1518. I don't know how to transcribe that one. I'm going to read an article from the Library of Arizona. So without looking at the bottom of this, so why 1518, everybody? I messed up, and I shouldn't have put this paragraph on the same page. So
without reading it, it was the printing press.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because that's what we're all about, is like figuring, okay, so how did the communication get across? How did that message get across? So good. The printing press. So in the early 16th century, Martin Luther saw the advantages of making his vernacular treatise, I think I'm saying it right, available cheaply to a growing body of avid lay followers. Another quote, 15th century Europe, this is the 1400s, experienced a technological revolution in the invention of the printing press with movable type that bears comparison with that of computers today. So they, as in this article, is ignoring the fact that this technology first came up in the East. This wasn't a Western invention. This happened in the East. It's one of the many things we tend to attribute to the Western world that actually originally wasn't. But we'll go with this because they want to talk about Gutenberg. And this is a side note that I've added because I wanted to figure out, so where was it created? And so it was created in China. The printing press revolutionized society there before being further developed in Europe in the 15th century by Johannes Gutenberg and his invention of the Gutenberg press. No one knows when the first printing press was invented or who invented it, but the oldest known printed text originated in China during the first millennium AD. Okay, so going on to a quote about Gutenberg. Gutenberg lived from 1397 to 1468. And the quote, Gutenberg, a goldsmith by craft, tried to conceal his manufacture of movable type and a machine for printing it. There were in his day no patents or copyrights to shield the inventor against pirating. The length of time needed to carve the type compelled him to borrow money on which to live, and this eventually catapulted him into bankruptcy. Before the banker confiscated his press and began to use it himself, Gutenberg managed to produce his famed 42-line Bible dated approximately 1455. So they expected the Bible was completed in 1455, but then from 1455 to 1500, you had this kind of overlap where a few books were being printed. It wasn't then taking off, while at the same time, there were many scribes as well. So another quote, the second half of the 15th century was a time of overlapping technologies. Scribes continued tediously to copy text by hand. Block books carved page by page from a panel of wood were stamped onto paper, and a few books were printed on the newfangled machines. Okay, so like, I guess I didn't realize that before, that so before movable type where you could change the letters around, they carved one big piece, right? And they used this piece over and over again, but each page, so if you had a 200-page book, right, you had to have 200 blocks, right, instead of just moving the type around. So that's a lot of work. Okay, so all the way until 1500, you still have this overlap where the scribes are doing a large body of that work. So a quote, between 1517 and 1546, I think the correct year maybe 1517, Luther's reforming career, Wittenberg publishers turned out at least 2,721 works, an average of 91 works per year. This represents around 3 million individual copies and includes many of the milestone works of the era, not least multiple editions of Luther's German Bible. This vast blossoming of what was essentially a new industry was entirely due to Martin Luther. So they expect the Bible was completed in 1455, but then from 1455 to 1500, you had this kind of overlap where a few books were being printed. It wasn't then taking off, while at the same time, there were many scribes as well. Did I read this right? That sounds familiar, like I read it already. I'm sorry if I did. The second half of the 15th century was a time of overlap technologies. Scribes continued tediously to copy text by hand. Block books carved page by page from a panel of wood were stamped on paper, and a few books were printed on the newfangled machines. Yeah, okay, so I read that again. I'm sorry. Okay, I must have went backwards. Sorry about that. Okay, So the presses of other cities turned out thousands of Reformation and a few counter-Reformation books, pamphlets, and broadsheets of their own. The success of Protestantism overall owed much to the printed propaganda. Catholic adversaries of the Reform movement never fully exploited the printing press for their own purposes. Luther's desire to expose the laity to his translation of the Bible and his message in other formats motivated his advocacy of universal childhood literacy. Okay, so this he did as you would expect in a tract, which could be printed, which could be spread en masse. Quote, at least 11 editions of this tract appeared in 1524 alone in more than 7 cities around the Holy Empire, Roman Empire. Another quote, as the novelty of the Reformation faded and religious nonconformity became ubiquitous, if persecuted, publishing houses unquote, began to focus on other interests, fiction, tracts of scientific discoveries, thoughts, etc. Okay. So they started printing other things, like beyond just religious items. They began focusing on fiction, tracts of scientific discovery, thoughts, and other things. Oh, I'm sorry. So Luke, your notes say 1518. What did I say for my here? This page? I think the correct year may be 15.
There's
Yeah,
a
that
little
was just
bit
my
back.
notes from a while back when you asked the question, what year do we start the Protestant Reformation, I think. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay. So you were right, 1518. Sorry, I'm not good at looking at the chat. I said I would and I didn't. I'm sorry. Okay. The printing press around 1455, but then all the way until 1500, you still have this overlap. But you need that printing press for what purpose? And then, so Espen and Emmanuel had shared what she was reading in the comments. She said, thank you. This is the printing press, and this is all about communication. So back here on the board, she's writing printing press communication. So even for the Protestant Reformation, what's it waiting for? Why isn't it coming 50 years earlier? If it came 50 years earlier, would it have been able to spread? No. When Martin Luther writes his 95 Thesis, he can then take it to a printing press, have it printed en masse, and spread through the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so you needed that advancement of communication technology to be able to have the message spread with power. Again, the first sentence of that article, quote, 15th century Europe experienced a technological revolution in the invention of the printing press with movable type that bears comparison with that of computers today. So that was how they had their technological revolution that particularly gave them the ability to communicate. So Paul was able to travel and communicate through ships on the sea, cleared of pirates, and roads laid by the Roman Empire. You come to the Protestant Reformation, and that was able to spread through this newfangled invention of the printing press. Okay, so now we're coming to the beginning of modern Israel. So when does that start? So what are they going to need? What are they going to need to help them spread that message at the very least through their glorious land through the United States? So does anybody remember, so the beginning of modern Israel, when does that start? And what do they need to spread the message to communicate their message throughout the United States.
Faster mode of transportation,
Yes.
like
What kind?
steamboats, trains.
Yes, exactly. That's two of them. There's one more item.
Telegraph.
Yes, there you go. Good, 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 good. Okay, awesome. And then, so what year is that? Okay.
1798, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. Good job. Both of you. Good job. All right. So the first steam-powered passenger train began service on Christmas Day, December 25. So she did write beginning of modern Israel, 1798, just like Luke said. And then Phil said, so she's starting off with one item, but she's going to cover all three. So the first steam-powered passenger train began service on Christmas Day, December 25, 1831. So why is the first passenger train going to begin December 25th, 1830? What happens a few months later in 1831? So this question confused me at first because I was thinking, well, why would they have it on December 25th? But think of it in God's terms. What's going to happen in the Millerite history? What happens in 1831? Why is that special? It starts, this passenger train is starting in the end of 1830, and just a few months later in 1831, what happens?
William Miller starts traveling and preaching.
Yes, exactly. William Miller is months from beginning to spread his message. He's studying on his farm. He's studying in quiet from 1816, really all the way to 1831. In fact, 1831, he begins to travel and teach, and only months earlier, December 25, 1830, the passenger trains are introduced, the first steam-powered passenger service. So between 1830 and 1840, 2,800 miles of track were laid and opened to operation. And she's adding that trains there. Good. Okay, so this is her paragraph, and what I did here was create a graph that visualizes what she's saying here, just so you get an idea, like visually what this means, right? So you have those 10 years. And so from 1830 to 1840, where 2,800 miles of track are laid and are opened up to passenger trains. From 1840 to 1850, there's 9,000 miles of track laid. And what happens in 1850 internally? So in 1850, they then have to take this message back to the world. Remember the 1850 charts. It's their Sunday law waymark. So from 1850 to 1860, more than 30,000 miles of track are laid in this time period here, right? And this is all, so if you add these all up, it's 41,800 miles of train track laid from 1830 to 1860. And to give you an idea of how distance, in a time frame of, visually speaking, how big is 2,800 miles, right? So I looked to find out how far across the United States was. And actually, from the Point Arena in California, which is the center, approximately the center of California on the coast, to West Cody Head, Maine, as the crow flies, and this is all the greatest distance between any two mainland points in the contiguous 48 states, the linear distance as the crow flies, is 2,892 miles. So that's how big this distance is, right? Now, during that time, most of all of these tracks were actually on the East Coast. So none of it went from Maine all the way to California. And I'll show you some pictures of that. So most of these tracks are on the East Coast, but I just wanted to give you a visual of how distant 2,800 miles was. Okay, so these are maps that show so in 1830 to 1840, these are in red. These are the tracks that were laid from 1830 to 1840. And these are all additions, meaning what I mean is it's all extended, like, okay, so like right here in South Carolina, this line is actually also on this one, right? But then they added to it, right? And then if you go to South Carolina, you can see that that line and this line is on here too, but then they added to it. So these are all, these maps are progressive. So it's not just what they laid for those 10 years, but these are all progressions. So from by 1830 to 1840, this is what they had. From 1840 to 1850, at the end of that, this is what they had. And from 1850 to 1860, this is what they had, okay? And I think that's how it goes. And these maps all came from the maps. These are maps showing the progressive development of the U.S. roads from 1830 to 1850. And it's from a pamphlet, The American Railroads, Their Growth and Development, the Association of American Railroads, January 1951. Okay, and then this is the 1860 map. And so you can see how widespread it is on the east, and they finally get some over here in Texas. And then there's a little tiny bit over here in California. And so it shows the progression of how it goes from the East Coast, and you can see how the roads are, the train tracks are progressing to the west. So it was between 1850 and 1860 that the railroads grew into a true network serving all of the states east of the Mississippi. Track mileage more than tripled. The US almost equaled the combined rest of the world in track mileage. So right when Miller is needing to start teaching his message, you have the introduction of the passenger trains, 2,800 miles a track. In 1840 to 1850, there's that first call. And there we have 9,000 miles of track. So remember, so that's the 1843 chart right here, right? And then you have 9,000 miles of track in I think that should be 1850. Sorry, that's a misprint. Typo. 1850, you have the second chart, the 1850 chart printed, and they're to go back to the world, and you have a more than tripling, over 30,000 miles of track laid interconnecting the United States. Right, it is interesting that the track was laid east to west, you're right. It makes sense because that's where more people were, but still, it's interesting. So from pioneer writings, this is a quote from James White. She says, I think, actually, she wasn't sure. And I actually went back to check that, and it's actually hard to tell who actually said the quote, because it's written in James White's memoirs or something, but it's hard to tell who actually he was quoting. So she says, I only want one sentence from it. It's talking about William Miller traveling in 1840, speaking about his elections and his journeys, because this quote comes from James White, but he's quoting somebody else. And so we don't really know who this quote originated from, or I couldn't figure out either. So it's talking about William Miller traveling in 1840, speaking about his elections and his journeys. All it says is that, quote, by stage and railroad, he reached his home in Low Hampton on Friday night following being absent from home nearly 6 months. And that's from 1875 JWSLM SLWM 142.1, and that stands for James White Sketches of the Christian Life and Public Labors of William Miller. So in that time period, he's traveling by stage and by railroad. In 1852, there was a large Millerite camp meeting where William Miller spoke with Josiah Litch, Joshua Himes, and Joshua Himes. So the railroad and the steamboat brought 1,680 people from New York. And it says of the 6,000 people who attended, 1,640 came from New York. They came by railroad and steamboat. Why could people gravitate en masse to these camp meetings? And that was anybody? I think what's the question's already been answered, but that's the question she had in there.
Well, because of the trains and everything that's opening up, transportation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. So in May 1842, a general conference was again convened in Boston. Camp meetings and conferences were being multiplied through the middle and northern states and Canada, and the flying angels or messengers of this judgment hour cry were seen moving with the speed of locomotives on railroads and in steamboats. So we haven't talked about the steamboat, but that was introduced in the same history. It was also a part of that technological revolution. I think I forgot to write it down here because I think the trains were there earlier. My board work, apparently I've messed up on my board work because it should have the, yeah, I'm sorry. So my board work is missing some stuff. I apologize. I was copy paste crazy over there. Okay, so some more quotes here. Not only on the campground, but from the highways, stages, steamboats, and rail cars, the songs of Alleluia to the Lamb and shoutings to the Most High God resounded and filled the air as we passed along. And these are, both of these quotes are from the same September 1850 JWE ADRE 53.5. And that stands for James White, The Advent Review, Volume 1, September 1850. And so the second quote, how was it that the city authorities and the railroad directors at the Salem Depot allowed so many hundreds of these crazy fanatics to fill up their buildings and recommence their meeting in shouting and praising the Lord? It's back. My board works back. So you have them gravitating to these camp meetings, but what gives them the ability to do that is the technological revolution that gave the United States the passenger train and the steamboat. Many people argue that this technological revolution made more of a difference, made more of a change inside the United States than the American Revolution had itself. In 1844, talking about Exeter, here's another quote. As the people on foot, on trains and in stages, wagons and buggies disperse into the various states, a mighty cry went up through New England. Quote, behold, the bridegroom comes. And that's from 1938 END FOME 130.1, and that stands for Everett Newfund Dick, founders of the message. Okay, so after the Exeter camp meeting, how did that message fly through the United States? It was in large part due to what is known as the market revolution, which gave us steamboats and passenger trains. The steamboat was introduced between 1807 and 1811, and by 1837, they had dug 3,000 miles of canals. They dug these thousands of miles of canals so that they could connect different parts in the United States and run these steamboats. That's how a people were also able to travel and spread the message. So trains and steamboats, and this is all communication of the message. Okay, so someone mentioned the telegraph. What year was the telegraph invented? 1844. And what were the first two things that it transmitted? What was the first message? Does anybody remember what the first message was that was transmitted in 1844?
Was that what has God wrought?
Yes, exactly,
That's right.
exactly.
Mm.
And then does anybody know what the second thing was that they transmitted?
Yes, but I don't remember.
Anybody else? So it was 1844. What happened in 1844?
Was
Is
it?
that the presidency? Political?
Yes, exactly. Yes. They so the first one was what hath God wrought? And then who had won the 1844 election? Exactly. Good job. So you can't disconnect the external political processes of that history from the spread of the message. We have taken part in Miller's mistake when we ignore the external events. Okay, so now we are moving on to the end of modern Israel. And she didn't ask much more questions. She started to speed up here. So I should have stopped and asked you the question, but I was starting to feel a little bit of pressure on time. So I apologize. So the end of modern Israel, 1989, it is evidence in and of itself that we are at the end of the world's history, that God has a message that needs communicating. The one solid evidence for that is our own technological revolution, the internet age, the information age, because this is all about communication. So you know that when we have such a revolution under the information age as the World Wide Web, that there is a message God is wanting to spread. First, it began with the road networks under the Roman Empire. Then we gained the printing press. Then we gained the trains, steamboats, telegraph. Then we gained the internet, the World Wide Web. These are all the main steps in the advancements of communication, and they all come at the right time period when God has a message that he wants to communicate. That's like huge. If we can't see that this is the time, right, that this message has to spread. Okay. And then Troy said the tracks laid from east to west could be a parable. What happened in the US was a parable for the world in that history. The midnight cry came from the east, Elder Parminder and Elder Tess, to the west. Now a parable of the world in our history at the end of the world. Oh, that's good. Yeah, because they do come from, yeah, like, yeah.
East of us.
I totally get that. Thank you.
Are they east of us? No, because they went from.
So anybody else have any comments? Questions? Cool. Prior to 1989, Adventism is neck deep in conspiracy theories. They have the Great Controversy. They have all of those things. The spread of the Great Controversy today, the spread of conspiracy theories today, is not the message that God needs and wants to communicate of itself. The conspiracies certainly aren't, and the Great Controversy needs explaining. God needs a movement. This was a movement right here, ancient Israel. 3 fractals, then their time template line. Protestant Reformation was a movement. The beginning of modern Israel was a movement. The end of modern Israel is a movement. 4 movements. 4th generation, right? We have members today turning from this movement to learn from Adventist pastors and Protestant speakers. What are they doing? If you think an Adventist, so she's kind of changing the subject now. So we're not really, we'll get back to it, but she's not really talking about transportation right here. So if you think an Adventist pastor is going to teach you righteousness by faith, put yourself back in one of those movements. If you're a Millerite and it's 1845 and you're going to go and sit at the foot of a Protestant pastor, what's the problem with that Protestant pastor? He rejected the 2300 days prophecy. He rejected the chart. And who is he praying to? Do you think he's going to explain anything about the character of God, the nature of the kingdom? If you're back in 32 AD, after the cross, you're a disciple, you're going to go and sit, you're going to go and sit at the feet of a Pharisee? There is no salvation outside of that movement. If you're a disciple, can you go back and say, I'll take some of the parables, I'll take part what I like, and I'm going to mix it with what my favorite Jewish Pharisee teaches, mold the two and create my own truth? Is that safe? Protestant Reformation, you're going to take a little bit of that Protestantism and a little bit of the Catholicism. Is that safe? That's what they did. That's why they were not a success. This does not come under the same category as the beginning and end of ancient Israel and the beginning and end of modern Israel. Because even Martin Luther took a bit of that truth, and then someone said, well, what about the Sabbath? And what did he say? I'm happy with Sunday. He kept his part of Catholicism and he tried to blend the two. And the Protestant Reformation, as far as bringing about a new church, was a failure. You come down to the beginning of modern Israel. Could the Millerites do that? Take part of Ellen White's message and then mix it with some of the Protestant pastor because they liked the way he spoke, because of his conspiracy theories fitted in their worldview? I want to be clear, because that's occurring more and more through the movement in Australia and in Oceania, who is particularly our audience today. So she was referring to her audience that she was teaching that day. Most of the people there were from Australia and Oceania, and so that's who she was talking about, because a lot of that was occurring there at the present presentation that she is talking about. So if you're doing that, you're walking off the path, and that's life and death. There is only salvation inside this movement. That sounds like exclusivity. It always has been, because the choice is always between life and death. So we can't get light going back to the pastors, but we know that. So we have the information age, we have the World Wide Web, we're locked down under a pandemic, and the message still can spread. I don't know how many current countries or continents we have represented today. So she's talking specifically on the presentation she was doing that day. And I know she knows Africa was, I know North America is, I know somewhere in South America is. We have multiple continents connected at one point in time. We should stop and think not only that this is so incredible, but why is that happening? Because as far as 6,000 years of Earth history, we've only had that for a few decades, a couple of decades. And the reason that we've only had that for a couple of decades is because it came right on time. Because now there is a movement that needs to go worldwide. So I wanted to lay that down before we go into Millerite history. because when we look at Millerite history, we need to see it in all its context. Any questions so far, comments? We're a little over halfway. I want to be clear that as I say certain things, as I make certain points, I'm not necessarily making application. What I want people to have is a greater familiarity with the external events that happened in Millerite history. And the danger is that in mentioning an external event, people may think that I'm making application. If I make application, I'll try and be explicit that that is what I'm doing. But there's a lot of history that I would encourage us just to become familiar with, so we get some context. So someone asked, should we not hear Adventist pastors? Does that apply only for us, or does it apply to the Levites too? Elder Tess answer, the Levites don't have much of a choice, although I think many are already coming in contact with the existence of this movement. We should not be going to Adventist pastors looking for light. They have none. Imagine back to end of ancient Israel after the cross. What happened to the veil in the temple? Is there any light left in that place? No. The Levites should be learning from the external events, I would suggest, more so than their pastors. The difficulty with looking to their pastors is even the ones on that seam on the right side, it's usually such a mixture of truth and error. I think it's more dangerous than identifying correctly the external events. I want us to look at our alpha. I'll draw our omega. So here's the omega, 1989, 9/11, Sunday Law, close of probation, second Advent. So we just want to do a short compare and contrast. And since I really don't want to go over time today, we're not going to do too much more, but I just want to make a suggestion, something for us to think about. This is the omega line on top. I've put it above our alpha. In 1798, there was an increase of knowledge. And so in 1798, there was an increase of knowledge. And in 1989, there was an increase of knowledge. Both the increase of knowledge of the alpha in 1798 and the increase of knowledge of the omega in 1989 was based on the unsealing of the book of Daniel. So when was this line first laid out? Bottom one, with 1850 for the Sunday Law waymark. I don't have a great memory, but I think it was at the German International Camp meeting, which was a year ago now, 2020. It's exactly a year since that camp meeting. So we've already been discussing this movement for some time now, the importance of 1850 and how it lines up with the Sunday Law, and then identifying 1861 as the close of probation, 1863 as the second Advent, and that was meant to occur in this time of trouble that occurred under the American Civil War, which went from 1861 to 1865, right? So if we can do a short compare and contrast of these two histories, Ellen White says in The Great Controversy, quote, the 1,260 days or years terminated in 1798, a quarter of a century earlier, persecution had almost wholly ceased. So 25 years before 1798 takes you to 1773. And what happened here was the abolishment of the Jesuit order. And this caused not a complete ceasing, but a large ceasing of the persecution that had occurred during the 1260. So question. When we come to our line, what are we saying this Sunday Law is all about? Now that we're headed to the end of ancient Israel, what are we saying is the theme is? Everybody knows that, right? What is it? question.
You're looking for equality?
Yes, exactly, equality.
Is that next to 1798? Is that supposed to be 9/11?
That's what she had on the board, yeah. That's what she wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for, because I looked at it a couple of times, like, wait, is that what she meant? But yeah, that's what she had on the board. But then she also had these two mixed up, which she changed, like 10 or 20 minutes later. Maybe it was 10, I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, because it's the time of the end, it's Alpha and Omega.
Yes, exactly. So the persecution almost wholly ceased here at 1773, but what's going to happen is this alpha line is a line of failure. We can't forget we need to make a contrast. It's an alpha history, therefore it is a contrast. It's a line of failure, therefore it's a contrast. So if there's internal failure, what do you expect externally? Failure. So not only did the Millerites, the Adventists, fail in their mission, but the external movement driving slavery in the United States, it also failed. This 1850 compromise was largely a failure when the northern states failed to enforce it. So do you guys all remember what this 1850 was? What happened there?
Fugitive Slave Act.
Yes, the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act, yes. So we'll discuss that more. So we need to remember that this line is failure. Persecution ceases here at 1773, but then what was to come in this time period, 1850, that persecution was going to rise up again. So persecution almost wholly ceases by 1773, but not completely. Elder Parmenter has discussed what happened in the French Revolution. That was also persecution from a different form, but then persecution is going to rise up again. Question, now I get a little confused on this and hopefully it doesn't get us sidetracked because we only have 30 minutes left. Do you guys, because who exactly was being persecuted in this 1260? Because it's not the same people that are being persecuted here, right? That part I don't get. Can anybody clarify? Because she doesn't talk about it.
Who's being persecuted in the 1260?
Yeah, so who's being persecuted in the 1260? And those are different than the people being persecuted here, right?
Well, it was those that didn't agree with the Catholic Church, that didn't go along with the Catholic Church.
Okay, so this
If
is,
somebody can say that better.
so it's Catholicism, the Roman papacy persecuting heretics, Protestants, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so who then is being persecuted here?
That would have been, did she say, let's see, did she say it was to rise up or it did rise up again? Was going to rise up. That persecution was going to rise up again. So it would have been, oh yeah, I don't know, go ahead.
No, I don't know. She the reason why I'm asking you guys is because she doesn't say. So I don't know that. So is it Protestants that are being persecuted here? Or is it slaves? That part I don't get. I'm not making the connection. And I think it's relative because you're going to have persecution here and here.
Rise up again, yeah.
Right? So are there Protestants being persecuted here? Were they?
After 1844,
There were some, right?
yeah.
But what she says is that persecution was going to rise up again.
Mhm.
Well, Elder Tess, not to put her down or anything, because I'm not, but she gets her is's and was's. They kind of get mixed up in her senses sometimes. And so I'm not going to put a whole lot of weight on whether or not she said is or was.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, but what she's saying, not only that it was, that it did, and I think she's referring to, because she's going to show us that it it almost wholly ceased here. So there's something that's going to happen here where the persecution is going to almost wholly cease and then rise up here, right?
Yeah, the point she was making in a couple previous slides though is how it's a line of failure, and so there's a contrast. So that's why I'm thinking she might have said was,
Okay.
but I might be wrong.
When we talk about persecution, it's always about God's people.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right, Christina. Great. Okay. So she's referring to the persecution here, not as slavery, but as the Protestants then. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know about that either, because I think what we're seeing is the persecution going against women in LGBTQ.
On our line.
Right.
On our line, yes. But on here, so on this one, there was persecution here, right, of the Protestants, and it almost wholly ceased, but then it came back up again. And so I'm asking you guys, so was this the Protestants being persecuted here?
In 1850, if Jesus would have come in 1863, the persecution would have been on the Millerite.
Yeah, I don't know.
It is God's people, and of course they would have stand on the side of freedom and everything, because if they would understand that, you know, that would have been the line of success. Like today, we understand the equality and all that. So,
Right. So that would have made it a line of success, right? But I guess because I'm trying to understand the next part, and so I'm trying to make sure that the people that are being persecuted here before 1773 are the same people that are being persecuted here, because she doesn't really clarify that. I think we're supposed to know it, and I don't. And so that's why I'm asking you guys. So I'll continue and see, maybe at the end, it'll all make sense to you and you can like explain it to me. Okay, so we'll discuss more of the line of failure. Persecution ceases here at 1773, but then what was to come in this time period of 1850, that persecution was going to rise up again. So persecution almost wholly ceases by 1773, but not completely. Okay, and then we talked about that. So, okay, so now in our history, so everybody, question, 25 years before here, before 1989, is what year and what happens here. So what we have said, the Sunday law issue is about equality, right? Is going back to the German International Camp meeting. So what's the Sunday law issue about? We said equality, but what happened here? So 1989 minus 25 is?
Civil rights.
Yes.
Civil rights movements.
So there's specifically one piece of legislation that this is all of that, this, you know, I can't say the year or else it would give it away.
Jim Crow?
No, Jim Crow.
Well, it's 1964.
Yep.
Civil Rights Acts.
Yes. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Right. When does Jim Crow start? I forget when that starts. I guess that would have started, you know, pretty much after slavery ended, somewhere in there, I guess. I'm not sure. Okay, so Elena had answered equality, and then 25 years before, persecution almost wholly ceased, right? So this was inequality, not entirely, but it did die down, and then it's going to come back up. So what happened in 25 years before, that was it was 1964, and you guys answered it was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the prevalent Civil Rights Act. So 25 years, a quarter of a century before 1989, and the increase of knowledge is the Civil Rights Act, which ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It's considered one of the crowning legislative achievements of the civil rights movement. So 25 years before our time at the end, persecution, not entirely, but largely ceased under the Civil Rights Act. The argument since is, just like the Constitution, just like the Declaration of Independence, who does this apply to? So who did this Civil Rights Act apply to? We'll go back here. So who did it apply to?
It was race.
Race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So did it apply to women?
Yeah, you said sex. So
Yeah. So the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, in their sometimes vague wording, should be used as intended for all. The Civil Rights Act should be read as intended for all. And the debate happening now is about what? Who does it really apply to? And how far does it really extend? So you have, even just in the last months, and this was, back in 2020, August, and this happened particularly under the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, his commission of unalienable rights. And what did his commission come to? He believed there were original rights, and then in the words of that commission, it became a proliferation of rights, suggesting that now there were too many rights. Now it's gone too far. These rights were not meant to be extended to everyone with the type of completeness that we would argue they should be read as, that we argue that they should be read as. So when you come back to the Civil Rights Act, it extended to women, it extended to people from different countries, it extended to immigrants, color, Black, white. Of course, this is the civil rights movement, so that's the crowning contents, right? But also religion. But also, what was debate last year, so this in 2019 into the 2020, can't remember it. I've read this like 3 or 4 times now, I can't remember the answer to this. So what was the debate in 2019 into this year, 2020? Anybody? I can't remember the answer. Oh, funny. When it says discrimination on the basis of sex, what about those who identify as a different gender? That's right. Okay. So what about those who are born attracted to someone of the same gender as themselves? Do they have the same civil rights as you and I? Who would say that we don't have that persuasion? The debate is, again, how do you read? How do you read the Constitution? How do you read the Declaration of Independence? How do you read the Civil Rights Act of 1964? And depending on how you read, determines who you consider has rights and who does not have rights. So the persecution, were we being persecuted actively between 1863 and 1989? No, you can see an application of that persecution as we take on the concepts of Babylon, as the Adventist church more and more loses its way. But the persecution was not directed at Adventists. The persecution was directed at who? Particularly in the context of the civil rights movement, its prior history dealing with the Ku Klux Klan, this is the issue of racism. It's the issue of nationalism. That's the context of the persecution that is being dealt with. There is also an inclusion in that of sexism, both sexism just in general and also sexism directed towards Black women who were not given the right to vote in 1919, 1920. So about 25 years before there is this increase of knowledge, you have this dying down of persecution. And what do you know is going to happen again? We talked about that. So what's going to happen again? Anyone?
Persecution rises up again.
Yeah. Persecution is going to rise up. Ellen White is saying they will be persecuted for their religious beliefs because that is what died down and is coming back up. But who was persecuted here in 1964?
Black people. You said 1964?
Yeah, right before that. Yeah.
Yeah, black people.
And I think, back up real quick. I think she answers your question there because she says Ellen White saying they will be persecuted for their religious beliefs because that is what died down is coming back. That answers your question.
Right here. Yes, you're right. So that does answer my question. Yes. So it would be the same people. So they would be persecuted for the religious beliefs here and then for here. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Okay. And then so now it's on equality. So same people that would have been being persecuted here. So basically the oppressed then would be, you know, race and sex will be persecuted again here. So this is where we have to stand like A.T. Jones in Congress and say, I don't care whether this is a law enforcing Saturday and it makes my life easier, or whether this is a law enforcing Sunday and it persecutes me. We stand for people's rights, whether they directly affect us or whether they don't. Minorities, yes. You can already start to see a compare, but also a contrast. And this persecution also happened largely under a church-state union because the South was defending slavery based on what book, everyone?
The Bible.
Yes. So the Old Testament and portions of the New Testament. So it was also a church-state argument. And we've discussed that over the presentations, gone before. We are not repeating as much as we did last year. So this presentation, for example, is unlikely to be repeated at another school or camp meeting by itself. Someone else may do that, but it's not going to be done even by them with their thoughts at the level it has been in the past. So we need to go back and watch the German International Camp Meeting, go back to the prior presentations that were already done that go into the split through Protestantism, Civil War and Protestantism. 1798, you have that split. You have that split in the Civil War. You have the split now. We talked about Mary Ralph. We talked about 1919 and the approach that a portion of Protestantism took at the very outset of globalism. But when it comes to this Jesuit order argument, this argument, and just like this argument here of the civil rights one, it's a split through Protestantism. I just wanted to remind us of what we've already covered before. So if Christ was to return here in 1863, right? And this was why we went on one of our tangents. If Christ was to return in 1863, what did the United States have to do? So going back to our last two classes, what does the United States have to do? It has to become a beast. That beast has to speak as a dragon. So it's going to be a beast that speaks like a dragon. We looked at what that meant. What does it mean when it speaks as a dragon? Anybody?
That was his practice.
Say that again?
His practice.
Practice.
You had profession and practice, and when it speaks as a dragon, it was its practice.
Oh, sorry. I don't even see that. Is it in the first paragraph or the second or third?
No, you just asked, what does it mean when it speaks as a dragon?
Oh, okay. And your answer is, say it
Well,
again?
that's the one from the previous presentation that she was laying out that the lamb-like horns is its profession, professes the Constitution, believes the Constitution, but what does it mean when it speaks like a dragon? The dragon was its practice, what it actually does.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So I don't know what your answer is going to be here, but that's from the previous study.
Okay, thank you.
I might have left the detail out.
She's gonna go into, so what have we talked about? What speaks when it comes to the United States? What speaks? It's our,
Oh, the legislative and judicial branch, is that what you're looking for?
yeah, there you go. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we looked, yes, we looked at the three branches of government. It'll be the actions of the legislative and the judicial. Good. There has been some confusion caused that I'm suggesting that we don't see anything in the executive, and that's not what I'm saying. If Mitch McConnell wants to block Obama, and so she says, someone correct me if I get Mitch McConnell wrong, and or Mitch and Jeff Sessions mixed up. Always in my mind, I can't even picture them differently. They feel like twins. So Mitch McConnell is going to block Obama from appointing a justice to the Supreme Court. In question, why is he doing that? Because he's waiting for a change. So in what branch of government is Mitch McConnell waiting for a change?
In the executive.
Judicial?
No, the executive.
Yeah,
Oh.
in the executive.
Oh, okay.
So the executive branch, he needs, so she's going back to this confusion. So she's saying sometimes there's some confusion because people think she's only saying that it's the legislative and judicial, but the executive is part of that, you know. So she's saying, how is it part of that? And is the executive branch. So he needs the executive branch to manipulate and sway the judicial, right? So I'm not suggesting that there is no action of the executive branch necessary to do that. But we need to see that the actions of the executive. But when it speaks, so when the dragon speaks, it's through the legislative and the judicial. It's through our laws, right? And how those laws are being enforced. So, and they're already arguing that Trump has appointed judges to the judicial branch who are uncharacteristically young, and these are lifetime appointments. So he's appointing them young. They're going to last in those positions for a really long time as conservative judges. So question, the changes Trump has made to the judicial branch, can another president change those changes? Can change those?
In the judges that are placed, right? Based
Correct.
on what you just said, and yes, that because they're, because they're in there for, like the Supreme Court, they're life appointments, however you want to say that.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so you set them up for, close to 50 years. There's a lot of them that are young, so they're going to be in there for a long time.
Exactly. Generation, right? Or more. They're, yeah, exactly. So no, nobody else can change them once they're set in there. So this is unchangeable for a generation. That's the extent to which these actions cannot be undone. And yet again, it began in 2014, as the lines tell you it would. So you need to see the United States speak as a dragon in the history prior to 1861. And we've already laid that out as being 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act. So that was in another presentation, she laid that out. I want to give us a couple of quotes. So we have 10 minutes and we have 20 pages left. So we might have to, we'll see how far we get in 10 minutes. So I want to give us a couple of quotes These have been read before, I'm sure, but just so everyone has them, Review and Herald, August 27, 1861, paragraph 4. These would be quotes from the German camp meeting 2. We will read J.N. Andrews, 1855. I just want to read the perspective they had of the 1850 compromise. It's 108.1. It just squeezes in there 1842, William Miller, 227.2. And I'm not going to read a lot of these from these, so don't panic. And Testimonies, volume 1, 201.1. And they're also written here the way you would see it in the paragraph. Okay, so this is 1861 Review and Herald, quote, at the Roosevelt Conference, when the brethren and sisters were assembled on the day set apart for humiliation, fasting, and prayer, Sabbath, August 3rd, the Spirit of the Lord rested upon us. So this is August 3rd, 1861, that she has this vision. This is the beginning history of the Civil War. Ellen White has taken off in vision and shown the sin of slavery. Quote, slavery has long been a curse to this nation. The Fugitive Slave Law was calculated to crush out of man every noble, generous feeling of sympathy that should arise in his heart for the oppressed and suffering slave. It was in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ. So when she says it is in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ, if you keep that law, what are you doing? You're violating the law of God. So what they have done is institute a law that to keep would require you to trample the law of God. Does that make sense? And you can keep it in the forehead or the hand. So you can, keep that law in the way in your thoughts or in your actions. So next quote, still in Review and Herald, God's scourge now is upon the North, that they have so long submitted to the advances of the slave power. The sin of Northern pro-slavery men is great. They have strengthened the South in their sin. So Elder Tess, this compromise, did it just occur in 1850? No. This is a series of compromises that the North has been making over the last decades, over the last half century. These are long-standing compromises that have built up to the 1850 compromise. And I want to make the argument from the very beginning that where they compromised more than anywhere else leading up to 1850 was in their elections. They compromised in choosing their candidates for election, because when they wanted to choose a candidate who particularly represented the North, they also wanted him to win. So would you choose one of those extremist abolitionists, or would they look for a nice looking centrist? They kept going for the centrist, and the centrist was not considered radical. And to be radical would be to be an abolitionist. So as we discuss more of the political history of that time, I just want us to consider that thought. So Tor says religious persecution in the Alpha history and civil rights persecution in the Omega. Another witness that we are living in post-Christian world. Yes. Good point. So this quote is from J.N. Andrews, 1855, and he's referring to Matthew 23, the Pharisees. Quote, they say that had they lived in the days of their fathers, they would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. But when their hour of the power of darkness came upon them, how completely did it show them under the power of Satan, the downward course of their own nation on the subject of African slavery is a fearful warning of the abyss into which it is about to plunge. And then, let's see, that's like that trial, right? The on the subject of that trial, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, is a fearful warning of the abyss into which it is about to plunge. Because so many people made up their mind are right there, the downward course of their own nation on the subject of gender,
Yeah,
sex. Yeah, I'm not getting the words out, but I think you kind of get it.
you need,
The culture voted against Amber.
Heard, yes, exactly. And here we go again. Okay, so this is written in 1855 before the Civil War. Quote, "The most infamous law of the 19th century is the Fugitive Slave Law." And then another quote this is from William Miller, 1842. "All these powers have pretended to work miracles to establish their authority over the bodies and souls of men. But what are the principles which each of these teach their political followers? The dragon and his political party, in whatever nation they may appear, will support tyranny, slavery, and aggrandizement of the few at the expense of the many." This is going to come into a question later. So, in whatever nation they may appear, so the dragon and his political power, in whatever nation they may appear, whatever nation, will support tyranny, slavery, and the aggrandizement of the few at the expense of many. Yeah, Troy, I've heard those comments too. People are like, a poor guy, referring to Johnny Depp, like he's the victim. Craziness. Okay, so here's the question. What is William Miller saying you need to look for? What's the spirit of the 1260? What should you expect to see when that spirit arises again?
that tyranny.
Exactly. So any nation that will support tyranny, slavery, and aggrandizement of the few at the expense of many. They will support the tyranny, slavery, and aggrandizement of the few, of the minority, at the expense of the powerful majority, the moral majority. They will try to establish their authority over the bodies and the souls of men. So even William Miller is recognizing slavery and the impact of equality on what you would expect these powers to look like. Going back to, okay, so this might have to be the last, I'm pretty sure I have like 13 more pages, but I couldn't tell you exactly how fast it would go. So I don't know if you guys want me to just keep going. I would imagine it would take like 15 more minutes or finish it up tomorrow. You guys choose.
I'm okay either way.
Any objections to continuing 15 more minutes?
I say finish it up tomorrow.
Anybody else?
We're okay
Yeah.
with continuing, but if people are tired, then we could adjourn for the day and finish tomorrow.
Troy said it's tomorrow.
That's good.
So yeah, since Troy is up the latest, we'll just continue this tomorrow. I think his vote gets a little bit extra weight since he's like, it's really late over there. Okay, so remember we're on page 92, and let's go ahead and pray. Elaine, you want to pray?
Me? Did you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, okay. Almighty God, as you lay out the parables and the parallels of histories, comparing and contrasting, we can see more clearly each and every day the handwriting on the wall. We can see the tyranny. we can see people's hearts so filled with hatred against minorities, against women. And we pray, Lord, to have greater and greater understanding, that we would have such a hatred for sexism that we would be able to recognize it in all areas of life. As this has gone somewhat unnoticed in the recruitment and development of this mindset, I pray that we would be prepared as the radical feminists that you've called us to be, to take a stand for what is right, as the abolitionists were to take a stand as well. Pray, Lord, that as we break tonight, as the Sabbath is approaching for us, and some of it has already begun, we just thank you for bringing us through another week. As we enter into the Sabbath, we ask you for a double portion of your Spirit, Lord, that through the messages, and through the review, that we would be prepared with hearts knit together as one with you for this great work. Pray that we would have a good night's rest and come back and be able to finish this up in the morning. We thank you for all our blessings and your goodness and mercy towards us. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Let's do. We're going to do a quick review since we're continuing from last night. And let me hit share screen. Okay, this one. You should be able to see the banner, communication technology, and the gospel.
Yep, got it.
Great. All right, so a quick review. So this presentation is based on communication technology and the gospel. So what type of communication technology, what was needed in the different I'll go back to in the different, okay, I can think of the word, movements. So we have Intervention Israel. I'm gonna go through it real quick. Don't look if you get dizzy. Okay, so Intervention Israel, Protestant Reformation, beginning of modern Israel, into modern Israel. These are the four different movements that came up through a time where God was sending a message. So in Intervention Israel, you have Christ and the message that he was sending through his disciples, including Paul. And because of that, God had to wait for peace to be able to be across the whole entire world from 4 BC to 180 BC to 4 BC to 180. So when Christ and John the Baptist were born in 4 BC to the end of when John was able to spread the word about Revelation, John the Revelator in 100 AD. So there had to be peace, and there had to be roads, and there had to be peace on the sea for Paul to move across the oceans, right, and a sea. And then during the Protestant Reformation, you have Luther and his the Bible, so the German Bible, and his thesis. So you had to have the printing press, and like it shows here, all of these have to do with communication and getting God's message across. In the beginning of modern Israel, in 1798, we had trains and steamboats and telegraphs, and that was to get, so William Miller in 1831 started traveling and spreading his message. There was in 1843, you had the first call, the chart, the 1843 chart. And then in 1850, there was the 1850 chart. So the trains, the steamboats, and the telegraph helped get that message across, that communication. Into modern Israel, That is when the World Wide Web started in 1989, and Elder Tess showed through these three examples, witnesses, that when God has a message to get across, he needs to have the correct communication technology to get that message across. And the final message has to be worldwide. The whole world is choosing before the end which side they're going to take. And so this message has to be worldwide, and we have the World Wide Web. And even though we were in a pandemic, God was able to get this message across through Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter, through the World Wide Web. On Zoom, we were able to video record and post all of these different presentations on YouTube. And this is the way God was able to communicate to the world this message. Okay, so that was the first part of her presentation. She also talked about, this part is a little bit more sketchy for me, sorry. Wait, let me look.
The persecution.
Yes, okay, thank you, yes. Okay, so let's go to, thank you. Okay. I'm gonna get as close to there as possible. So, okay, so persecution, like Elaine reminded, thank you. So so these are the two lines. She has them switched. So the omega is on the top here and the alpha is on the bottom. She usually draws it the other way, but she was making a point. And so this is the alpha. So from 1770, which started at the time of the end for the alpha is 1798. But her point was 25 years before the time of the end was 1773. And this is when the Jesuit order was abolished. Well, before the Jesuit order was the 1260, right? And then during that time was the persecution. And that was the persecution of God's church, right? And so at that time, before that, it was Catholicism persecuting the Protestants, right? So the Protestants were coming out of Catholicism. This is God's church at the time, the Adventists, those Protestants. And that's where the persecution was. At the 1773, we have a whole almost ceasing of that persecution, not entirely, but almost entire stop of that. And then during this history before 1850, that persecution started on the rise again. Okay. And then, so comparatively and contrasting, we went to our line, which started in 1989, the time of the end. And the 25 years before that was 1964, which was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And before this was the persecution. It was based on race, which was equality, right? So right here, equality is being persecuted, and it was almost wholly ceased in 1964. And right here, before the Sunday law, that persecution is going to come back up on the rise. So minorities, race, equality, sexism, gender, transgender, any type of those minorities that were listed in this Civil Rights Act, which were, remind me, what was the list? She told us, and I always forget. So it's race, gender, does anybody, color, religion? I forget where it is. So anyway, and I'm sure we passed it. I don't remember exactly what all those things were in order and exactly what they were. Sorry. Does anybody else remember? I should have my chat open, sorry.
What was your question?
What are, in the Civil Rights Act, what were the items listed? I know one is race, religion, get what else?
Oh, what she had in the notes itself.
Well, no, what is in the civil rights?
Oh, tyranny, was it tyranny?
What is in the Civil Rights Act?
Okay.
What is protected in
Oh,
the
okay.
Civil Rights Act?
Got it, okay.
I cannot remember those exactly. Anyway, here they are. So
Yeah,
in the Civil Rights Act, ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And she was asking us who those rights belong to, and it is our opinion, as in art is in the movement, that these items should be based for everyone, not just a selected group. Okay, so I think that covers, that's an overall coverage of what she talked about so far.
yeah, sorry, had your question wrong, my bad.
No, that's fine, that's fine. But that's a good, and then she went on to talk about, it's still in that same line, what the United States is, to bring about this persecution, what is the United States? So she says, I just wanted to remind us of what we're already covered before. Going back to our last two classes, what does the United States have to do? And they have to become a beast. So that beast has to speak as a dragon. And we talked that to speak like a dragon, to speak is through the legislative and the judicial. And she reminded us that that she's not excluding executive, because the executive has the power to not elect, but to assign the members to the judicial branch. And so the executive has power, but to assign to the judicial branch, so the and not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts also. But it is the legislative and the judicial that speaks. So through our laws and how those laws are interpreted and enforced is how the United States speaks. But all three branches are necessary to do that. And she put that, so this at the Sunday law is where that's going to happen. Our quote Sunday law, which isn't actually based on a Sunday law, it's just what we use to interpret that. So it's on equality, and that lined up with the Fugitive Slave Act at 1850, their Sunday law. Okay, and she read several quotes, and I'm getting back to where we were. And last night it was page 92, but I made some edits, so now it's on page 95. Okay, so I was just fixing some of those places that I had talked to where, oh, I should have made this a question, and I fixed that last night. So, okay, so now any questions before I get started for the last, I think we have like 10 more pages, maybe 15. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm still not understanding why in the alpha line that 911 is there. I'm wondering if it was just, I know you said that it was in the video,
Yeah.
but I'm still not why, unless maybe she just copied from the top to the bottom.
She actually, that's a good question. She actually started with this bottom line, and then she put this one over the top of it. And she was just like, she started off with writing these out because, Sunday, she didn't even have 1850, 1861, 1863 on the board. She started with 1798, 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation, Advent. So she added the 1850, 1861, and 1863 later, and she never was really covering this waymark. So there was no emphasis on Islam and and that waymark of what else does the harbinger, what else does the 9/11 stand for? So basically, she was just going with a very generic line, and she was just, her point was the persecution. So what happened before 1798 and what was going to happen before 1850. So there was no emphasis on this. And that's why she never put a date there, because there was no emphasis on this waymark in this presentation.
What we do know is that if you're looking at the line of the Great Controversy, that waymark is 1844. If you're looking at the 144,000, which that line seems to depict, of the Millerites, because it has its second advent in 1863, you're looking at 1840.
That's true. Yeah. So I think mainly, I mean, and so that could be confusing if you had two different dates there. But her point of the line was to talk about the persecution here and the persecution here. And so it was not essential for her to put a date here. Does that make sense? And does that help?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, that was a good question, because I hadn't thought about it, but you're right. It would be confusing. So, and that she didn't put a date there. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Okay. Any other questions, anybody? Okay, so just for anybody who was not here last night, and there were a lot of you who are, to get the full impact, you would have to watch what we presented last night, or go back to Elder Tessa's presentation on communication technology and the Bible, and the gospel, sorry. Okay, so go back to this page. So now we're going to go to First Testimony, Ellen White. So she's continuing on talking about the same subject of persecution, but we're going to continue with the quotes that she was reading. And this is the list of, so we've already gone through the Revere and Herald, J.N. Andrews and William Miller quotes. And now we're going to the final ones that she's going on, First Testimony 201.2. So quote from Ellen White: "We have men placed over us for rulers and laws to govern the people. Were it not for these laws, the condition of the world would be worse than it is now." Continuing on, so this idea of freedom, does it call for a lack of law or a lack of government? No. So the idea of freedom is not calling for a lack of law or a lack of freedom. The issue is as follows here, quote, "Some of these laws are good, others are bad. The bad have been increasing, and we are yet to be brought into straight places. But God will sustain his people in being firm and living up to the principles of his word. When the laws of men conflict with the word and law of God, we are to obey the latter, whatever the consequences may be. The law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, we are not to obey. We must abide the consequences of violating this law." So basically, we are going to have to violate certain laws of the land if they go against the law of God. And we're just going to have to abide with those consequences. So she's talking to us as the movement. We're going to have to do this. So this is going back to the first quote we made, Review and Herald 1861. It's, quote, "in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ," unquote. So when we come to the Great Controversy definition of the Sunday law, what is the problem with the Sunday law? So I'm asking you that. I'm not going to go on to the next slide. So she said, so the question is, for all of you, what is the problem with the Sunday law on our line? Anyone? Okay. So, don't make me call on you guys.
So the question is, so when they come to the great controversial definition of a Sunday
You're
law,
fuzzy, we can't hear you.
Stay closer to the mic. And I appreciate you answering.
and so when it comes to the great controversial definition of the Sunday law, what is the problem with the Sunday law? That's the question we're trying to answer, right?
Yes.
Well, it has nothing to do with Sunday?
No, but so if there's a Sunday law, so whether it be an actual Sunday law where you can't worship on Saturday and you have to worship on Sunday, or if it has to do with equality, or if it has to do with slavery where you're supposed to hand over a slave, or if it has to do with equality where you're forced to do something that goes against God's law, what's that problem? What's the problem with that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have to obey God rather than man.
Exactly. Yeah. So these laws, this Sunday law is going to force us to make a choice whether we obey God's law or whether we obey this law of the land, right? So thank you for answering that. So this, so according to Elder Tess, this Sunday law, it requires us to trample on the law of God. What was it in 1850? This compromise, which made it the most infamous of the 19th century, it required you to trample on the law of God. So now you had to violate the laws of the land. So this is the 1850 compromise. So that was the, I just said it a minute ago, didn't I? The slave law. Oh, someone tell me what it was.
The Fugitive Slave Act.
Thank you. The Fugitive Slave Act. Thank you. So this is the 1850 compromise. It lines up with the Sunday law waymark. And it is, as you would expect, found in early writings, Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1. This is the whole context of that first document where she covers Earth's history from Eden to the Second Advent. And she centers the sins of Babylon on this issue right here at 1850, because this is where you see, in William Miller's words, the tyranny, the work of the beast power to control the bodies and the souls of men. So, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to control the bodies, so women's bodies, and the souls of men to do according to their ideology. So, but now trying to enforce people against their conscience to participate in the same. So she says, I'll close here for time. The next presentation we want to delve, and so the next presentation will be the one that that Legina and Fel are going to do right after this one today. So next presentation, we want to delve more into the structure and start having an overview of the external events found in the structure. So just to summarize, to close, we have looked at all of the movements God has operated with to spread the message of his kingdom over the last 2,000 years plus. You have the end of ancient Israel. It's a movement. It arises in the exactly the time necessary when you have this Roman peace, this special 200-year time period, which is able to encapsulate the growth and spreading of the gospel, the work of John the Baptist, Christ and his disciples, and the work of Paul. You had the Roman roads, peace on land, peace on sea. Then you have the Protestant Reformation that happens right on time as the printing press is able to be used to its fullest extent. And you have that method of communication give life to the Protestant Reformation right on time. You have the technology revolution of the early 1800s, which happens right on time. December 1830, the train system. Before that, steamboats and the telegraph, right on time for the spreading of the Millerite message. And it booms between 1850 and 1860. It booms by more than 3 times in this time period of 1850 to 1861. So here, so between 1850 and 1861, the space here, it more than triples, because that is when the gospel is to go to the world. This is that 1850 chart here. We spoke about the midnight cry message after Exeter, but even before that, how it spread on rail cars and steamboats. Then we talked about our own history. One of the evidences that God has raised up a movement to communicate a message is the technological revolution itself of the information age in the World Wide Web. We spoke that there is no light, there is no life outside of this movement. It should make sense to us for every other movement. And we have the testimony of 3. The reason the Protestant Reformation did not become God's church in the sense of ancient or modern Israel is because of their own failures. It also wasn't that the time frame. It did its work, a necessary work of preparation. Yes, so in the review, I missed that part where she said, someone was saying, asking the question, can we go back and listen to the pastors in the church? And she was, this was, of course, the presentation was in 2020, and we've learned since then that no, we can't go back to the pastors of the SDA for the same reasons that that the beginning of modern Israel could not go back to the Protestant Reformation listening. They had to stay within the Millerite history. They couldn't take Ellen White's teachings and Miller's teachings and take a little of that and then go back to their favorite Protestant teachers and listen to that, because if they did, it would be a movement of failure. And that's what they were doing, and it failed. The Protestant Reformation couldn't take parts of Catholicism and Protestantism and expect that movement to go forward, and that failed. The end of ancient Israel, the disciples could not go back and listen to the Pharisees and expect that to work. Okay, so
Kind of interesting. Each one, there's a coming out.
yes,
Coming out means leave behind what was there.
yes, exactly. And all along through as it changed, there was a coming out. Yes. So, but they mixed. They held on to so many Catholic ideas. You can't mix the message of a Pharisee with the parables of Christ. You cannot mix Catholicism with Martin Luther, and he did that himself. You cannot mix Protestant teachers of the day with the message of William Miller and Ellen White. You cannot mix Adventist pastors today after the veil has already been torn and expect them to give light to this movement. That's not how God teaches us. We then began to compare and contrast. This is mostly review, but we did include this 25-year time period of the dying down of persecution. Here in 1773, the abolishment of the Jesuit order, and it starts to give people the freedom they need to enable this process. So the Civil Rights Act did the same. Persecution arises again in the Millerite history before 1850. Persecution arises again in our history before the Sunday Law. But you can see that this all has to do with equality. And which is why it did here in 1964, and it will again, it will here before and through the history of the Sunday Law. We then looked at 1850 as a waymark and reminded us of the 1850 Compromise and how it caused people to be confronted with a choice. you either, I think this should be trample, you either trample the laws of God, obeying the laws of the land, or you disobey the law of the land and uphold the law of God, which is exactly what you would expect of the test of that waymark. Next presentation, we will build on the structure, the fractals of our alpha history, and begin a look at external events. So I'll go ahead and say this quick prayer, and actually it's not quick, it's actually 2 pages. So here we go. She says, if you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear God in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you for how you have led in our past history, not just in the one that we have now, but in the past history that extends over the last 2,000 years. We see, Lord, that while we view you as all powerful, because you have chosen to work through humanity, you are limited. You are limited by our own networks, by our own communications. If you want to work through Paul, you had, Lord, you need to wait for there to be peace on the Roman Sea and on the Roman roads. Lord, you'd love the people, you would love the people worldwide equally, but we see how you have limited, that you have been limited by humanity, by your desire to work through humanity. We are grateful for your patience with us. We are thankful, Lord, for the technology that we have today, that we have, that we can speak, that we can teach, and we can learn together the messages that you now wish communicated worldwide. We are grateful, Lord, that the communication opens up so much of the world. We think about countries where even YouTube is controlled. There are portions, Lord, where the light can extend because their own dictatorial governments cannot extend because of their own dictatorial governments. We see how you are still limited by countries that struggle with electricity, that struggle with access to Wi-Fi, that struggle with governments that are repressive regimes and control the online access of their people. But still, we see you do your very best. I pray, Lord, that there might still be ways to reach these people, that they cannot be so limited in their ability to hear this gospel message. I pray, Lord, we will learn correctly the message of selfishness, that the midnight cry is designed to create in us that selflessness. I'm not sure what I said, but I meant selflessness. So we'll learn correctly the message of selflessness that the midnight cry is designed to create in us, that we consider those outside of ourselves, that the needs of those outside of ourselves, the civil rights of those outside of ourselves. I pray, Lord, that we will understand the nature of your kingdom and why it is exclusive, why there are rules about who can enter and who cannot. May we see your love in these rules. May we see what they are designed to teach us and the healing that they are designed to create in us. And that's it. So does anybody have any questions? Comments? It was a really good presentation she gave, very powerful.